Once upon a time, gods ruled the earth. Unlike we believed, they did not just watch from the skies or issue commands to mortals. They directly governed humans for over 241,000 years. Who are these kings with such unbelievable timelines? What was their reign like? We'll find out together in this new episode of Secret Origins. Welcome. In the early 1900s, the world was not ready for what was coming. A team of archaeologists found a clay prism buried under the ruins of ancient Nippur. Led by a man named Hermann Hilprecht, this team made a startling discovery in Nippur, present-day Iraq. The clay prism was made of fragments not more than 8 inches tall. But the information on these tablets went on to defy every logic known to man. On this prism, called the Weld-Blundell Prism, there was a list, and the list consisted of the names of kings. You heard that right. These kings were no myths or legend stories, but actual rulers recorded in an official tome. What's more interesting, the Weld-Blundell Prism had the names of dozens of rulers stretching back thousands of years. In no time, it was called the Sumerian King List. But it was not just the detailed names and descriptions of the kings that shocked scholars. It was the numbers. The tablets show that some of the earliest kings reigned for tens of thousands of years each. If the human lifespan averages 100 years, how was this possible? Does this mean the kings were non-human? If yes, what were they? Look at this. According to the King List, the first 8 rulers governed Earth for a combined 241,200 years. Some reigned for 28,800 years, others for 43,200. One king alone ruled for 36,000 years. But here's the twist. The document transitions smoothly from these impossibly long reigns into names and dates that modern historians can verify. Later kings, like Gilgamesh, have human lifespans and archaeological evidence of their rulership behind them. So, if the second half is real and verifiable, on what basis can we refute the first part of the list? This points to one thing. Perhaps these kings with longer lifespans were divine. But in case you missed it, and you wonder who the Sumerians are, they were one of the earliest civilizations to emerge on Earth. They were said to have lived in the Sumer region in southern Mesopotamia. This is present-day Iraq and Kuwait. Since they were an ancient advanced civilization that reigned between 4,100 and 1750 BCE, they had kings who ruled for thousands of years. But the timelines with which their kings ruled come off as eerie, and this is why. For a long time, historians have tried to portray the Sumerians as human-like. Because of this suggestion, one would expect their kings to also have a lifespan similar to humans. But with the Kings List coming to the surface in the early 1900s, all we knew about the Sumerians has been challenged. Why are the reigning years of the first 8 kings unbearably long? As a comeback, historians write off the first 8 kings as symbolic. That is, those kings were just metaphorical storytelling from an early civilization. But why would the Sumerians use mathematically specific reigns to describe fantasy? It makes no sense. It gets more puzzling. Not only the Sumer civilization, but other ancient civilizations, Babylonian, Hindu, Egyptian, all mention rulers who lived for thousands of years before the Great Flood. That's right, the same Great Flood we all know. According to the King List, the Great Flood happened at a conspicuous time. That is, right after the 8th king's reign, the global catastrophe struck. And with the deluge, it wiped away the world. But the timing is interesting as well. At about the same time that the global flood breached the King's List, there is known geological sea level rise, globally. And this was around 10,000 BCE. With such a solid alibi backing the King's List, the question changes. Now, we can't ask, is this mythology? Maybe the real question is Who truly ruled Earth before us? Let's dive into the King's List. Once upon a civilization, before cities rose, before written language came to be, and before wheels were manufactured, there was a city called Eridu. The Sumerians believed it was the very first city ever built. What's more, it was not established by wandering tribes, but by order of the gods. And according to the Sumerian King List, kingship itself didn't evolve from human systems. It descended from heaven. At the center of this divine order stood one name, Allulim. He was the first king of Eridu. But this was not all to King Allulim. The Sumerians dared to say this, that he was the first king of Earth. Ancient tablets describe Allulim as neither a tribal leader nor a warrior chief. Instead, he was portrayed as a figure of extraordinary wisdom and stature, elevated by celestial authority. He was chosen, not born, appointed, not elected. In Eridu, where temple foundations now lie under sand and time, legends say Allulim ruled from a ziggurat that shimmered under the sky. This is a place where heaven touched earth. His kingship marked the dawn of recorded rule, and perhaps this was the golden moment that showed that humanity was no longer alone. If that made you heave a sigh, brace yourself. The King List states that Allulim ruled for 28,800 years. Wait, what? Yes, not 100 or 1,000, but 28,800 years. Modern scholars tried to call a bluff and tag it symbolic. But the Sumerians didn't. They gave precise numbers rounded to the nearest 3,600 years. These weren't exaggerated estimates. They were cycles, patterns. Let's break it down. In Sumerian numerology, the number 3,600 was a base unit called a sar. Allulim's reign equaled exactly 8 sars. To the Sumerians, this wasn't absurd at all. Instead, they viewed it as a cosmic pattern. And when cross-referenced with ancient Hindu, Egyptian, and even biblical genealogies, similar 1,000-year lifespans appear with uncanny frequency. And they always do, before a great global catastrophe. Whether symbolic or literal, these figures reflect a time when rulers were seen as something more. Not fully immortal, no, but they were definitely operating on different biological laws. King Allulim was the first of such bizarre breeds. However, in the 1970s, an author named Zecharia Sitchin introduced a radical idea. Allulim may not have been human at all. Based on his translations of Sumerian texts, Sitchin proposed that kings like Allulim were part of an extraterrestrial race known as the Anunnaki, who came from a distant planet called Nibiru. He argued that these beings started civilization and ruled over humans for tens of thousands of years. Of course, mainstream scholars dismiss his work. But Sitchin's theory still resonated with those who saw too many myths overlapping across cultures. If true, Allulim wasn't just a king, he was our first overlord. After the end of King Allulim's reign, kingship did not return to the sky. It passed to Alalgar, the second ruler of Eridu. According to the Weld-Blundell Prism, Alalgar governed the earth for an astonishing 36,000 years. This surpassed Allulim's tenure, extending the legacy of divine rule. King Alalgar's reign marked a continuation of an era when kings were not seen as mortals, but as caretakers appointed by forces beyond. But what was King Alalgar's rule like? Ancient Sumerian texts describe Alalgar as a figure of immense power and vision. He's credited with shaping early governance, spiritual order, and city building. Although there is little info about his life in the archaeological record, his name endures in multiple King List variants. However, one thing was certain. Eridu prospered under Alalgar. The city wasn't just a spiritual capital, but it evolved into a center of urban and sacred design. Structures aligned with celestial bodies, temples mirrored constellations. If you think Allulim ignited kingship, Alalgar made an institution of it. King Alalgar didn't descend from heaven. He built heaven on earth, starting with Eridu. But there was a problem with the great king's rule. Upon research, archaeologists uncovered ancient foundations in Eridu dating back to 5,400 BCE, including the remains of what may be the world's oldest temple. But what's strange is the sudden sophistication of it all. The layout, the engineering, the alignment. It suggests prior knowledge. This fuels the theory that Eridu, under kings like Alalgar, may have functioned as a staging post or even a colonial outpost for non-human intelligence. If you wonder why, you are not alone. Astronaut theorists argue that the architecture, the astronomical placement, and the sheer antiquity of Eridu imply intentional settlement, not evolutionary development like we thought. If Alalgar's 36,000-year reign was real, then what kind of being could live that long and still have time to build a city? An alien, perhaps. If Alalgar institutionalized divine rule, then Enmenluana, the third pre-flood king, expanded it, and he did so both in duration and influence. According to the Sumerian King List, Enmenluana ruled for a whopping 43,200 years. That's 12 Sars, a precise Sumerian numeral cycle. This is too deliberate to be fiction. Also, his reign is not recorded in Eridu, but in Bad-Tibira, a city equally drenched in mystery. Bad-Tibira was said to be the city of the sacred forge. This is the place where divine metalwork and heavenly materials were first introduced to Earth. Enmenluana's reign is linked with metallurgy, order, and production. This hints that his role may have been more industrial than spiritual. Unlike the previous kings, there is no deep mythos around his deeds. However, his name suggests power through crafting. How about his seat of rule? Word carries that it connects directly to the Anunnaki, who, according to ancient lore, used Bad-Tibira as one of their key operational centers on Earth. There is no doubt, King Enmenluana was the industrial king no Sumerian saw coming. Let's talk about his niche for a moment. In many cultures, metallurgy is divine. The act of forging metal and transforming earth into a tool or weapon. This was a gift only gods could give. In Sumerian myth, the gods who taught mankind how to shape metal were not just artisans. They were beings of fire, star, and stone. Enmenluana's role as ruler of Bad-Tibira puts him at the center of that story. And he is not alone. The Greek Hephaestus, the Egyptian Ptah, and even the Hindu Vishvakarman. They all share uncanny similarities with the extraterrestrial archetype Enmenluana seems to represent. One thing was consistent. His forging craft wasn't just physical, it was sacred, just like his 43,200-year reign. King Enmengalana was the fourth king of the antediluvian era. Yet another ruler from Bad-Tibira, his name was found etched into the ancient Weld-Blundell Prism. The King List recorded his reign as 28,800 years, mirroring the earlier king Allulim. But while Allulim symbolized divine authority and Alalgar symbolized structure, Enmengalana was different, and it starts with his name. Enmengalana is translated to mean Lord of the Celestial Me. This linked him directly to heavenly knowledge. In Sumerian tradition, Me refers to divine decrees gifted by the gods. Does this mean that Enmengalana had something more? Yes, he did. Enmengalana was a guardian of this sacred information handed over by the gods. This was an intellectual king. one not focused on war or construction, but on interfacing with the heavens. His reign at Bad-Tibira continues the city's mystical significance. For this king, ruling was not just about forging metals. No wonder researchers argue that under Enmengalana's rule, humanity first tracked celestial cycles and began to understand the rhythms of the universe. He was that king. So when you think about the origin of astronomy, remember that this king, whose reign spanned 28,800 years, this was his forte. Whether you are a Scorpio or a Sagittarius, there is a chance the art came from King Enmengalana. This wasn't a king counting seasons. This was a king who read the sky like scripture. It doesn't end there. The idea that Enmengalana ruled with celestial awareness led some theorists to suggest he was more than a scholar. They say he was a representative of the stars. Historians point to the possibility that such early rulers were not just influenced by extraterrestrial beings. Instead, they were a combination of both human and divine, and their goal was to maintain balance on Earth. When you think about it, King Enmengalana's connection to the me supports this theory. Perhaps in modern terms, he might be compared to a data administrator operating across time. His rule was not about governance in the human sense, no. It was about maintaining resonance between heaven and earth. This led scholars to name him the Celestial Engineer. Isn't this accurate? But if you'd like to learn about a king who went overboard in his spirituality, King Dumuzid is that man, or well, that god. After Enmengalana, the next in the antediluvian line was Dumuzid. Also known as Dumuzi the Shepherd, his name appears not only on the Sumerian King List, but in later Mesopotamian myths. According to the list, he ruled for 36,000 years, reigning from the city of Bad-Tibira, like his predecessor, Enmengalana. However, Dumuzid's story blurs the line between ruler and deity. How so, you ask? King Dumuzid wasn't remembered as a king of war or infrastructure. Instead, this king was remembered for his relationship with the goddess Inanna and his symbolic death and rebirth. You heard that right. He was the king who was said to die and be born again. This earned him the title Shepherd, as he was viewed as a strong and sacrificial leader. Another thing that makes Dumuzid unusual is that he transcends the king list. He shows up in the epic of Gilgamesh, Inanna's descent to the underworld, and in numerous hymns. Unlike other kings, he was absorbed into the divine pool over time. His legacy was more than political. It was too good to be true. In no time, Dumuzid was no longer regarded as a man. The Sumerians began to view him as a god of vegetation, cycles, and the dying earth. His story echoed in later myths like Osiris, Tammuz, and even Jesus. In the myths, Inanna's descent to the underworld ends with Dumuzid being chosen to replace her. His punishment? Death for half the year to symbolize seasonal decay. But he always found a way to return every spring. The resurrection factor represents an archetype for most religions today. What do you think? Is King Dumuzid just being glorified after death, or was he always something more? King Dumuzid reigned for an auspicious 36,000 years. This is a number too exact and symbolic to ignore. What's more, his transformation from being respected as a king to being a god marked a turning point in the king's list. After each rebirth, the Sumerians knew they weren't dealing with a mortal anymore. This was a different kind of ruler. King Dumuzid ruled, died, and returned through rebirths, and just like his mystical reign, his legacy never left. The next king on the Sumerian King List ruled not from Eridu or Bad-Tibira, but from a city called Larak. This is a city that to this day remains lost. His name was Ensipadzidana, And like others before him, his reign lasted 28,800 years, a perfect 8 Sars. Little is known about the king himself. He left behind no legends, no myths, no hymns, and yet his presence on the king list was precisely recorded. So what was special about this king? What sets Ensipadsidana apart is not what we know about him, but where he ruled. The lost city, Larak. Larak is one of the 5 antediluvian cities listed in Sumerian myth as existing before the flood. But no physical trace of it has ever been found. This stark absence only deepens the queries. If the Sumerians revered these cities as holy, and Larak was one of them, what could have made it so important? Let's talk about Larak for a moment. Ancient texts mention Larak only in passing, rare, brief references. One time it was described as a city of healing and judgment, possibly linked to the deity Ninurta, god of war, agriculture and law. On other grounds, scholars suggest Larak might have existed in the north of Sumer, possibly near the Tigris River. Others claim it could have been entirely metaphorical. Maybe it's a spiritual stronghold, not a geographical one, but it goes deeper than that. Some researchers dared to propose something bolder, that Larak, like Eridu, was a functional part of a global grid. That's to say that Larak was an ancient energy system established by the gods to regulate natural and spiritual energies across the land. In that system, Ensipadsidana wasn't a king in the modern sense. Instead, he was a guardian of balance. His reign wasn't forgotten. Maybe it was just hidden along with the city he governed. Suspicious, right? The Sumerian Kings List gets more interesting. Right after King Ensipadsidana came Enmendurana, ruler of Sippar, another of the 5 antediluvian cities said to exist before the Great Flood. His reign, according to the King List, lasted 21,000 years, a number that aligns with Sumer's divine math system of Sars and sacred cycles. Enmendurana is known for more than just his years on the throne. Ancient texts refer to him as a king who had a special relationship with the gods. They called him the ruler, who received divine wisdom directly from the heavens. Imagine communicating directly with the heavens. How supreme is that? If you think that is very intriguing, brace yourself. The most intriguing claim tied to King Enmendurana is that he was taken to heaven without dying. This phrase echoes another ancient figure, Enoch, from the Hebrew book of Genesis. Do you remember him? Enoch was said to have walked with God and was taken without experiencing death. The parallels have led many researchers to draw direct comparisons between the two. Whose story is the truth? Or did one myth copy from the other? Maybe we will never know. In Mesopotamian texts, Enmendurana is referred to as the one who was initiated into the secrets of the gods. He is said to have learned divination, astronomy, and celestial patterns while communing with divine beings. If you wonder how possible this was, King Enmendurana was said to have communicated with these beings through a literal craft that took him high into the heavens. When you look at it, his ascension may not have been a mere metaphor. It could mean physical removal or perhaps a dimensional shift, placing him beyond normal human reach. This was no ordinary king. He was a bridge between the terrestrial and the divine. The next king on the Sumerian list had a different ball to play. Unlike Enmendurana, he did not ascend into heaven without returning. This was a different Sumerian king, and what made him special is that he was the last king before the flood. Enter King Ubara-Tutu. This is the last of the 8 antediluvian kings recorded in the Sumerian King List, and he was the ruler of the city of Shuruppak. His reign spanned a whopping 18,600 years, a duration that, while still far beyond human capabilities, is the shortest of the pre-flood kings. To the surprise of many, his rule marked a dramatic turning point in the narrative. His city, Shuruppak, was located on the banks of the Euphrates and has been excavated by modern archaeologists. It was real, and at some point around 3000 BCE, it was devastated by a massive flood. According to Mesopotamian texts, including the Eridu Genesis, Ubara-Tutu was the father of Ziusudra, the Sumerian counterpart of Noah. Like the Bible story, when the gods decided to flood the earth, Ziusudra was warned by the god Enki to build a boat. This elevates King Ubara-Tutu to more than a name on a list. King Tutu was the patriarch of the last generation before the Great Reset. This made him the end of an era, and the link between myth and memory. How surreal. But after King Ubara-Tutu's reign, something devastating happened. The Great Flood. The Eridu Genesis places the Great Flood immediately after Ubara-Tutu's reign. The King List even includes a sharp division. Then, the flood swept over. Unlike the earlier kings, Ubara-Tutu is tied directly to this catastrophe that cuts across global mythologies. From the biblical flood of Noah to the Greek story of Deucalion and Hindu tales of Manu, there was one huge flood sent to destroy the earth. And along with it went the great king, Ubara-Tutu. What do you think about these 8 kings on the Sumerian King List? Tell us in the comments. And if you're ready to dive deeper into the mysteries of the ancient gods who once ruled Earth, tap the next video on your screen now. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Keep your minds open, and until we meet again.